Hi everyone, my name is John. Welcome back to my channel. I've been filming a few reviews today, several actually, and this is my last one because after I film this one, it's the last I've written and I need to write some more before I film some more. So this was a book I read for Historathon, the wonderful year-long reading event where we all read history. In the spring was one of my 500 AD to 1500 AD books. And this is a Princeton University Press book. Princeton University right there. This is Ibn Khaldun, an intellectual biography by Robert Irwin. Ibn Khaldun was an interesting guy. He lived from 1132 to 1306. And I just realized I made it 1406 in my review. So I made him live well past 170 years old. I'll have to go back and fix that. Ibn Khaldun doesn't get first billing as really one of the top tier medieval Arabic speaking philosopher polymaths of his day. And there were many, many of them. That honor usually either goes to Ibn Rushd, which is usually anglicized as Averroes, who lived in the 12th century, or the earlier Ibn Sina, who is usually anglicized as Avicenna. However, Ibn Khaldun is often considered one of the greatest social scientists to work in Africa during the Middle Ages. So great, in fact, that he wrote a book called The Muqaddimah, which roughly translates into English as a prologue or a prolegomena or an introduction. And it is still considered one of the first attempts at a kind of comprehensive sociology. Robert Irwin is a historian and a novelist, actually, who became fascinated with Arabic language thought early in life, including Ibn Khaldun's work and his political surroundings, and that's the subject of the book. Ibn Khaldun was born in Tunis, in modern-day Tunisia, under the Hafsid Sultanate, and lived a highly peripatetic life traveling between Nasrid, Grenada, and Mamluk, Cairo. He traveled all over North Africa looking for a regular job as a scholar or a secretary or a scribe, but never really found anything permanent. And many scholars interpret his pessimism regarding history, which I'll touch on in a bit, through this failure. Those familiar with the Muqaddimah will know that it lays out a theory of history. It's a cyclical theory of history with eras of alternating burgeoning and decay. Robert Irwin incorporates this idea throughout the book, suggesting that Ibn Khaldun drew carefully from his own experiences, his own personal experiences of having periods of success with his career and then periods of relative sterility. This isn't surprising considering the state of North Africa at the time, which was comprised of, at least as Robert Irwin talks about it, many fractured mini-states, mini-empires. In fact, there's quite a bit about the sort of internecine tribal politics among many of these groups, sultanates, kingdoms, especially in the first half of the book, which will probably only be of interest to a specialist, unfortunately. One of the most enduring theses of the Muqaddimah is that society is composed of tribal itinerant groups. Ibn Khaldun was thinking of the Bedouins. And there are more settled urban groups. Ibn Khaldun thinks that a concept called asabiya, which roughly translates to English as group cohesion, but can have connotations of tribalism or community. That asabiya is the impetus which allows smaller tribes to conquer larger populations, in which this solidarity has dissipated or vanished. Once the smaller group has conquered them and gained power, their sense of asabiya will in turn start to decline, making way for the next rural group to take power. And so the cycle continues, repeating itself about once every 4 generations by Ibn Khaldun's reckoning. Other historiographers like Giambattista Vico and Arnold Toynbee took Ibn Khaldun's idea of a cyclical theory of history and ran with it, adding to it and alighting from it as they felt necessary. One of Irwin's points is that for better or worse, Ibn Khaldun has been co-opted by many subsequent thinkers. In just a few pages, he compares him with Thomas Mann, Confucius, Polybius, and Oswald Spengler, without providing much comparative insight, but it's interesting how they all drew from him. Mann, Confucius, Polybius, and Spengler, quite the diverse group of thinkers there. But because Ibn Khaldun's analysis includes some economics, some Marxists have sort of glommed onto him as an Marxist. And because of his skepticism toward received myths, he's been called a rationalist, which is really interesting because he explicitly talks about sorcery and magic and how evil they are, and how he speaks against them. But some people have called him a sort of incipient rationalist. Some have even suggested, not long after the election of Ronald Reagan, actually back in the 80s, that Ibn Khaldun's ideas prefigured the Laffer curve. In short, he's the Rorschach test of medieval Arabic-speaking polymaths. He has a history of being whatever you want him to be. If you want a one-book resource that summarizes Ibn Khaldun's major ideas, you'll get that here. You certainly will get it. But you'll also get a lot of extra information, like the aforementioned politicking, speculations regarding whether Ibn Khaldun may or may not have been a Sufi. Robert Irwin thinks he almost certainly was. And other topics that may seem only marginally or tangentially relevant to his actual ideas. This is a great resource if you're already moderately knowledgeable about Ibn Khaldun's body of work, especially if you've already read the Muqaddimah or the Kitab al-Ikhbar, another book that he wrote after the Muqaddimah, which translates to Book of Lessons, something akin to sort of a historical encyclopedia. If you want a broader or more general introduction, Irwin may give too much detail about North African politics or secondary analysis about the historical reception of his ideas, the Muqaddimah, instead of looking just at the ideas themselves. Read alongside the Muqaddimah itself as ancillary material, or under the tutelage of someone who's an expert or a scholar in the field, they could help you better contextualize the information, which I didn't have. I just read it independently. This would have been a better reading experience, I think. I just don't have the background in medieval African or North African Islamic history of this period to be able to really take as much out of it as I could have. But I do plan to read the Muqaddimah sometime in the future and maybe experience that. Princeton, by the way, has a copy of the Muqaddimah out in their Princeton Classics line, which I also bought a couple of years ago and have showed on this channel. But an interesting book. Certainly, you get some of the big ideas, but you get a lot of other stuff, a lot of politics, a lot of his movements that may not be of strict interest to someone like me going into this. They're interesting in their own right, but I was just more interested in the ideas as the subtitle, an intellectual biography, sort of set off. But an interesting book about a fascinating man nonetheless. Robert Irwin's Ibn Khaldun, an intellectual biography. I will see you soon with more books. Bye.